Hey, 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 live from Denver. It's Friday night. Hey, everybody. Let's make sure that we are rocking and popping here. We are. Hey, everybody. Hey, critics. Hey, everybody in the chat. I see you guys. I am very excited about tonight's episode. You guys asked for guests, and I am bringing guests. And this will be the first of many, I am sure. We're not necessarily going to have this every single week, but I have definitely got a whole little list of people I intend on inviting onto the show. And to my fantastic pleasure, I have my actual professor from my studies on the psychology of coercive control guesting on the show tonight, and we will get to him in just a few minutes. First, I have a few regular details to do. As you can see, I am not joined this evening by my beautiful wife, Melissa, and that is very unfortunate for me, but she is feeling under the weather tonight. She was very dismayed about that. She very much wanted to be here tonight. But, you know, that's what happens. And so it's me flying solo tonight with y'all. However, I do not have channel memberships enabled, actually. Thank you for asking about that. Something I've been thinking about, but wasn't sure if that was something anybody wanted. Hadn't even really explored it yet, so take that up separately. But hey, everybody in the comments, glad to see you all here. Let's go ahead and do some sort of normal beginning of the show stuff, and then we will get to my guest, Dr. Dubrow-Marshall. So do it. Okay, good. I will do it. So, first thing is I have a quote for the week, which I wanted to share. In fact, I brought two, and these are out of since Mel didn't provide me with one because I didn't ask her for one, I will give them to you myself. This is out of my Quotable Atheist book, and this is not meant to be, horrible or offensive or awful to anybody who is a believer, but yet just something to think about, And here is a quote from one of my, this guy is a great comedian, Al Franken, and also was a U.S. Senator for a while. Here's a quote from him. Members of the religious right sometimes forget we don't live in a theocracy. They can be in the public square and express their opinion, but to expect other people to alter their behavior to say that, for example, that homosexuality is immoral because it says so in the Bible. I mean, it also says you can't eat pork. I don't see a lot of Orthodox Jews saying people who eat pork shouldn't be allowed to get insurance benefits. I mean, there's stuff in the Bible about how to sell your daughter. So that's a thing. And then the other quote I wanted to share with you, which I thought was much more powerful, is from Buckminster Fuller. And this guy is amazing. He's the man who kind of created Dymaxion geometry and geodesic domes and things like that. Really interesting inventor and man. And he said this, and this is quite profound. He said, "Sometimes I think we're alone. Sometimes I think we're not. In either case, the thought is quite staggering." I agree. I think that is quite a staggering thought either way. Anthony, thank you for that super chat. Very appreciated. All right. And of course, I am not going to let you guys down. I did bring Benson Cam, and this is our beautiful little dog, Benson. And let me throw him up on the screen there. It's our Snuggles, Not Struggles section of the show. And you can see he got a little haircut. We got him trimmed this week. And he really starts looking his age when we get him trimmed down like this. You can see his big black eyes sticking out. And he is just, just my little fur baby. He is so adorable. I just can't really get enough of him. This is him sitting on my lap, obviously, earlier today, just so we could get him on camera for you guys. He was being a little shy. And he was a little tired today. He got a little bit of the runaround, but there's our Benson Cam for you guys. So yeah, soak it up, soak up the cuteness. All right. So there is our Benson Cam. Yes. Oh yes, absolutely. We will definitely talk gaming, Alex. Yeah, I see you guys in the chats here. This is awesome. Okay, so now that we've gotten sort of the beginning stuff out of the way, oh, thank you, Cynthia. Very appreciated on that donation there. Yeah, we do love our little Benson. So let's get to the main course, shall we? Let's just dive right into it this week. And yes, we will have the ability to take calls later in the show. So not right now, but later on, the number on the screen, 984-214-4154. I do have the phone lines connected. So after I've gone over some questions with Rod, then I was just thinking, should I call him Professor Rod? After the show, after that part, we will open it up for calls if you guys want to call in and talk with him or ask him questions yourselves directly. But first, I've got some prepared questions that we're going to go over. So let me throw my guest window up. There we are. Okay, good. So now, Rod, are you there?
I am here, Chris. Hi.
Yay! Excellent. Okay, good. So we should have sound coming through for everybody. If I can hear it, y'all should be able to hear it. So, a little bit of echo. Okay, well, we'll try our best to deal with that. Maybe I'll bring it down just a little bit. So, Rod Dubrow-Marshall, my mentor, my friend, my professor, the guy who literally sometimes had to drag me through the program. Welcome to my show. I have really been anticipating this.
Well, thank you, Chris. Me too.
Awesome. Welcome. So I think we should just start talking. You put together quite a tour de force of a program in teaching about the psychology of coercive control. And so I have some questions for you here. First off, interesting, because a lot of people in the ex-cult world, and especially in the education side, are former cult members themselves, including you. You had your own cultic experience. And if you could tell us, briefly about what that was and what you were involved in, and and what did your own recovery process entail, and how do you look back at your, your younger self now with the wisdom of age and experience in education?
Well, thank you for the question, Chris, and also thank you so much for inviting me on. It's my great pleasure to be with you and everyone this evening. And that question really is an interesting one for me on several levels, as I'll briefly outline. I was a member of two political cults back in the 1980s and 1990s. They were both far-left revolutionary Marxist groups, which meet the criteria for cults to the extent that we have them. Maybe another topic of discussion. One was probably more coercive in its modus operandi than the other, but both were clearly very far on the left of politics, and certainly were planning and hoping that the workers' revolution would be around the corner. And my recruitment process was the kind of quintessential student experience, in the sense that I was recruited at university, age 18, through actually a Labour Party meeting. The UK Labour Party had a club on campus, and this group essentially infiltrated the Labour Party and recruited me that way. And it was quite a traumatic experience. I had some really bad experiences in that group. A number of us ended actually leaving together, and we actually joined another group that in certain respects politically was even more on far to the left than the one I'd been a member of, but actually in terms of its way of operating was a little less coercive. So you might say just a little bit of harm reduction going on there. After which we then, a number of us left that group not to join another cult at that point. And, it took several years before I came to the realization that actually I had been in a cult. And by then, I'd actually started supervising my first doctoral student, who went on to successfully get their doctorate, doing research on cults. And we went to a conference of the American Family Foundation, as it was at that time, AFF, which then became ICSA or ICSA. And at that conference, Dennis Tarish was presenting, and Dennis is a renowned professor and writer in the field. And he was talking about his experiences in the far left group that he had been a member of. And suddenly I had this kind of major moment of suddenly realizing, and I won't use the exact thought process on your podcast, Chris, because I don't want to offend anybody, but it was like one of those WTF moments in the sense, it looks like I was in a cult too, everyone, and I hadn't really thought about it that way, and that was really because the stereotype because this was late 1990s, right? And the stereotype, certainly in the UK at that time, was that cults were all religious, that they were particular types, like the Moonies, like the Jehovah's Witnesses. And to that extent, we hadn't really been educated about the fact that cults come in all shapes and sizes, all different types of ideologies. And not only didn't I realize I was in a cult for a number of years until that moment, but also I really had no recovery process whatsoever. I didn't seek any professional help at any point. And interestingly, I was talking earlier today with a colleague who does some work in the field about how people can sort of self-deprogram, which is an interesting concept, because we know the term deprogramming used to be used to describe sort of the forcible exit of people.
Yeah, that was not good stuff.
No, it wasn't. And so to almost reclaim that as something that people can do themselves. Now, I actually think that people benefit from support from people who've been through a similar experience. But also that people can help themselves. And certainly my approach to psychology is very much towards empowering people. And so I actually quite like the idea that people can, to a certain extent, help themselves move through that recovery. Obviously, it depends on how traumatic it's been. But for me personally, oddly, even though I talk all the time about the importance of support and help for cult survivors and survivors of all types of coercive control, I actually didn't get any professional help myself. Now, the people that know me well might say to me, well, based on knowing you, Rod, maybe you really should have had that help. But I'll let others judge that. And of course, it's never too late to get the help. So I could yet be convinced.
Let me ask you, did your cult have a name?
Yes, I'm always good at avoiding that, aren't I, when I talk about this? I've noticed this before. The group that I was a member of went by several names, but it's kind of one of the names it went by was the Alliance for Workers' Liberty. Okay. It was better known when I was in it as Socialist Organizer, and basically it was a Trotskyist Marxist revolutionary group that was an interest group inside the Labour Party. And actually, Dennis Tarish, I mentioned earlier, he was in the Militant Tendency, which was rather better known on the British left and was larger back in its heyday. But the two groups really hated each other. And one of the things with radical groups is that, of course, as well as hating most everyone, because, to one extent or another, everyone else are the fallen people. On top of that, they really hate each other even more. So the rivalry between the groups was very intense indeed, interestingly. But that was the name of the group that I was a member of for the longest, yeah.
Got it. So it was basically a far leftist political orientation kind of cult.
That's right. And it was a group whose mission was to overthrow capitalism and who genuinely believed that the workers' revolution a la 1917 was just around the corner.
Right.
And one of the orthodoxies, unhealthy orthodoxies of the far left is that they take what happened in 1917 in Russia and say, well, actually, this is what we can expect might happen in 2023 in the UK or in North America. And the idea that would happen even from a historical point of view is nonsensical, let alone, looking then at whether the way the Russian Revolution happened was actually a healthy thing, because as everyone knows, I'm sure, that it was centered around the major population centers, Moscow, St. Petersburg, etc. But Russia is a big country, and there are many parts of the country where the revolution really, in a sense, didn't happen, but was, in a sense, transplanted onto those parts of the country. From those population centers. And so, if there's going to be revolutionary upheaval, you want people to do it for themselves rather than it being imposed on them. And yet from the start, in many respects, that wasn't a healthy process. And so the idea that you would want to replicate that anywhere, I think is highly questionable.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was kind of thinking about it from the point of view of clearing the planet, right? Like it's the same level of kind of unreality, right? You have this like, oh, it's just around the corner. It's just about to happen. We're right there. And then when you really actually apply just the smallest amount of skepticism and query to it, it just falls apart like tissue paper. It's such a fragile thing. And yet when you're in it, it feels like everything. It feels so strong and so true. That's the part of the psychology as part of it that just absolutely amazes, and it's kind of awe-inspiring in a way how deep people can go in believing things that just have no basis in fact whatsoever,
Yeah, and avoiding the dissonance is a protective behavior that most people automatically, attend to their self-care in that regard, and cult leaders included, of course. And so on the revolutionary left, there's the idea of revolutionary defeatism, the idea that when things get really bad, you're not succeeding. That's actually really good because that shows that revolutionary consciousness would get raised. So we would call constantly for a general strike. We would try to get people out on strike. And the more that we failed, the more this was proof that the capitalism and the capitalists were really screwing us, and that therefore the workers' revolution would actually come sooner, even though, objectively speaking, it was coming rather later because we were being defeated the whole time. So as bad as it got, as good as it got. And that's the paradox that most cults manage to create in the minds of their followers, of course.
Yeah, exactly. It's the dissonance. Exactly. I was reminded with a podcast I'm posting tomorrow about Fessinger and the original work on that, and how, the fact that the end of the world didn't come was just proof positive that the group was doing good work. And with Scientology, it was, Hubbard was writing in the 70s that we've got 5 years. Oh, and then it didn't happen. Oh, well, it's only because Scientology exists, see? And that's why the world didn't end, as Hubbard had predicted. Okay, well, let me ask you this then, and our next question here is, actually, before I get to this, let me address something you said, because that, solo recovery, or this, the sort of getting yourself through it, is something I did for years before I went and got some therapy. And it was quite interesting to me in looking back on it that it was actually a side effect of doing your program that sort of put that in place for me as a real priority. It was always something that was kind of an option, and yeah, if I could ever get some therapy, that'd be nice, maybe, we'll see. And then, the amount of emphasis placed on self-care throughout that entire program, especially at the beginning, was really came through to me, and started getting some actual therapy as a result of that. And I I'll never go back. I thought, everything, I guess, in its place and time. I think it was kind of necessary that I go through a lot of the process I went through. And I'm sure, for you, it's not necessarily like we look back on that. Well, do you look back on that with regret now? Because I don't.
No, I don't. I had some good friends, and of course, I also met my best friend, who happens to also be a psychologist, Linda. So, in a way, I've often said that perhaps that's why I've not sought, psychotherapeutic help, because we kind of have that on hand. Although that's obviously not the main nature of our relationship. But obviously, we talk about the experiences that we've both had, and the psychologists we can kind of help to process that to an extent. But I think education is a really core and important part of therapy and of recovery. Because that's part of how people, I think, can be empowered, how people can get their agency back, or to have agency and be able to construct or reconstruct an authentic type of identity. And of course, there's other types of therapy, but I very much advocate for educative processes, psychoeducation, some people call it, as a way of moving people along. So certainly, I've recognized, I know we're going to talk about the course shortly, but I've certainly recognized the fact that for some of our students, the course is, helpful to them in terms of helping augment their understanding of what they've been through, and to that extent, hopefully helping them move forward in their recovery. I mean, that's not the extensive reason for the course, but the fact that it can be helpful it is a really moving thing for us, and that's why we emphasize self-care so much. But so many organizations, including many courses, of course, don't do that, and that's something I do regret, that the fact that more places don't put as much emphasis on self-care as they should. But no, I mean, if I had my time over again, I wouldn't necessarily jump headlong from my undergraduate degree straight into my PhD, because I did my undergraduate degree and then followed that up with my PhD straight afterwards. This was, if you like, my attempt at cult cleansing right back in the day. And of course, it didn't have that effect. It had other good things, but it left me with the same baggage that everyone has after a cult experience, which it did take a longer time. And of course, I also think the recovery is ongoing. So there's still parts of my thought process and language. And I think we were talking the other day, and I was describing communism, and I used the term Stalinism to describe it. And when you're a Trotskyist, that's how you describe communism, right? So you
Stalinism.
Stalinism, because communism is okay, because communism was the purity of Lenin and Trotsky, which was then distorted by Stalin. And to a certain extent, that's true. But at the same time, there's something also about those original concepts, like I was saying earlier on, in 1917 Russia, that are also highly questionable. Right. But you can always spot somebody who's had a Trotskyist experience if they refer to communism as Stalinism. So in that sense, guilty as charged. You only talk about Stalinism on occasions.
Right. Question from the chat: how long ago was it that you broke free of all of that? You mentioned doing your undergrad work. Was it before all of that?
No, I left the second group that I was a member of in around 1998. And so basically I was a member of the two groups for approximately 10 years. And I left the second group in around 1998. So I did my first university degree, 1987 to 1990. So I'm giving you an indication of my age here, which I expect the chat to say that can't be possible.
Right.
And I'll talk to those comments in a moment.
Right.
Yeah, and I did my PhD from 1990 through 95. So oddly, I got through that. So the second group I was in, I used to make the joke that if they were more coercive towards their followers, they would actually be more effective as a group. So for a cadre of wannabe revolutionaries that were seeking to take down the state, they were amazingly disorganized.
Funny that.
Yeah, exactly, and very bad at corralling us into doing anything. Whereas the first group that I was a member of, I have to say, embodied all the most sort of toxic elements of cults in the way that they operated. And that group was actually in the Healyite tradition of the Workers' Revolutionary Party, and Jerry Healy in the UK, who was renowned as being an abusive far-left political cult leader, also known as somebody who was an abuser of women within the groups that he ran. And on the far left, there's loads of splinter groups. Groups break off from the mothership, sometimes hook up with other people, sometimes don't. And so the group I was in was a funny mixture, actually, but partly it came out of that Workers' Revolutionary Party tradition.
Okay, awesome. Man, somebody also asked, Henny, since you asked, self-care for me started immediately after getting out of Scientology. As soon as I went down that rabbit hole and realized that I had been used and abused for all those years, and the anger sort of, I stopped seeing red. I started looking, and I've talked about how, like looking into psychiatry, looking into LGBT issues, and like those were the first things I dived into. That was almost immediate for me. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's go to our next question here, which is beyond your own experience, what inspired you and Linda to create an entire master's program on coercive control? I mean, it is a gargantuan undertaking to put something like that together. So what are your hopes or desires for the future of education on this subject?
We had noticed across the world in different countries that there were single courses addressing aspects of coercive control or cults, but they were fairly few and far between. And so we had really dreamt, Linda and I, to the ability to create an overall program of this nature. And then in 2015, in England and Wales, in the UK, 3 laws were passed that year. The first was the Serious Crime Act 2015. Section 76 defined controlling and coercive behavior, including in psychological terms. For the first time then, it was possible for a perpetrator or abuser to be prosecuted for psychological abuse rather than physical abuse. And this was a landmark piece of legislation largely aimed at coercive control in intimate relationships and families. So that was the first piece of legislation. Coincidentally, the Modern Slavery Act was also passed that year, covering human trafficking. And also the Counterterrorism and Security Act 2015, which was an upgrade, you could say, of earlier counterterrorism legislation, was passed. But that included within it important guidance under the PREVENT program, which has its controversies, but within PREVENT is channel guidance, which basically lists how the warning signs of recruitment into extremist groups are over-identification with the group, a them-us binary identification and ideology, and a dehumanization of the other, of people outside of the group. And it seemed to me that somebody in the UK Home Office had read Lifton. And what that indicated to us is that this was a really ideal time to create a program that tried to bring all of that together, that addressed coercive control in relationships, families, groups, gangs, and organizations across the piece, recognizing that those domains are soluble, that the people, perpetrators in particular, are not choosy about where they perpetrate their abuse. If you're a traumatizing narcissist, you like to do that most everywhere you can. And actually, in that regard, the silos that have been created are both professional ones and academic ones, and we want to kind of break down those walls and get to a better understanding of how coercive control operates psychologically, but also culturally and historically across those domains, and also to look at ways that people can be helped in their recovery and rehabilitation. So yeah, it was a huge task, but it was probably a thing that we've enjoyed doing most, particularly in our academic careers, was to put that program together. And really in 2017, when we started, we had no idea if anyone would come. I mean, you can create a course or a program. It doesn't mean that anyone's going to want to study it. So the day that the first group of students rolled up is a day that we'll never forget. And back then we did the course on campus at the University of Salford. We moved the course to be a distance learning program in 2020, not because of the pandemic, but because we had literally dozens of students from overseas, from outside of the UK, say to us that they would love to do the program, but they couldn't afford to relocate. So we really decided to take the plunge and move the course online. And that's actually significantly increased the number of students on the program, which is really wonderful. And also the diversity of our intake as well. So absolutely, we have loved doing it, and I sometimes have to kind of pinch myself that this is really happening, that we've been able to sustain a program like this for the years that we have.
Well, it's awesome. And it really, here's how I think about it. I don't know if you've thought about it this way, but for me, I've thought being part of the experience of it and relating to the other people who did the program, because there's a lot of back and forth and a lot of, we were the United States cohort, right? So we were the guys, who we meet with you guys out, on US time. And then, of course, we would get to know one another and sometimes become social media friends and things like that. And it occurred to me, watching what they're doing, watching what some of my alumni, I suppose, are doing in the post-education, experience is some of them are also being vocal like I am. They get on a microphone, they start talking about this. They want to educate the public and broadly about it. We become sort of psych science communicators to try to educate people more broadly who won't or can't go and do a master's program but need this information so badly. So I think in a way you are creating a little army of people who understand this as sort of an anti-cult army. I don't want to say anti-cult cult because that's not what we're doing at all, but it really is an anti-cult army of people. It's really people who are empowered with knowledge and a skill set and an ability to, hopefully some of us at least have an ability to communicate about this. In a more, sometimes in a little more layman's term kind of way. I'm not going to ever walk anybody through that mathematical model that we went through that one day. But there were some other models I can't wait to show people, right? And of course, we have Hassan's model. We have all kinds of models, and we can talk about these things intelligently and educate people because of the fact that we were exposed to coercive control across so many different domains, so many different areas. That was an inspired idea, I thought. Do I have it right that covering coercive control in domestic violence, in cults, in trafficking, in gangs, in all these different fields and areas, even in terrorism, that's a unique thing to your program, yeah?
It absolutely is. There's no other program in the world that covers coercive control across all of those domains. There are programs, obviously, that look specifically at terrorism, more from a political science stance usually. There are courses or programs that look at domestic violence or intimate partner violence. And there are criminal justice programs that address trafficking and modern slavery. But to our knowledge, there are no other programs like ours that do all of that, and which essentially we hope equip graduates with the ability to work flexibly across those domains. And I don't agree with many cliches, but the one that about knowledge is power, or at least good knowledge, correct knowledge is good power. I think what we're creating is a benevolent army of people that can do good work in countering coercive control and cults, but also coercive control across domains, because so many cults are family-based.
Yep.
And also involve trafficking. And so really what you're looking at immediately is coercive control across the domains right from the get-go, when you start to dig deep into what most groups are like and the way that they operate.
Yeah, big time. Since it's a question, and since we are on the program itself right now, I want to say that it is very interesting because you really can come into this from a wide variety. We had people who had come into this as domestic abuse survivors. We had people who came into this as domestic abuse counselors. We had people who came into this as cult survivors, as cult recovery therapists. We had a lot of different experiential things coming in, people with varying diverse backgrounds coming into this program. And I'm curious, somebody asks here, what are the stated prerequisites, or what do you have to have to prep for in order to be able to do this master's program at Salford?
We try to be as accessible as possible. While our normal entry requirements are an undergraduate degree, and our preference would be a degree in the social sciences. That could include psychology, of course, because there is a psychology base to the program, but it's also an interdisciplinary program. So we've had graduates from a wide range of academic disciplines and practice bases who've successfully completed the program. But actually, we're really committed to accreditation of prior experience and learning from across people's life experiences, not just their education, but also their professional work and their writing. So we've seen a number of people succeed on the program who haven't had that prior educational attainment. And of course, that's really important because, a lot of people in cults or in domestic violence lose out on education experience at a younger age. And we wanted our program to be a way of giving people an opportunity to get back some of what they may have lost previously. And, I was partly inspired because my own father, who was a teacher and a head teacher, in fact, of a primary school, did a teaching certificate when he was a young man, but he actually didn't complete a full undergraduate degree. But as an adult, he went back to university to do a master's degree, even though he didn't have an undergraduate degree. And I suppose I always thought, if my own dad could do it, surely other people can do it too. And there are many great examples of that.
Great. Well, and segueing over to our next question, there's a question from the chat, another good one here, which is, how would you, because I know how I've handled this, but how would you deal with people who talk about, or even change the mind of somebody who's talking about, oh, you'd have to be a moron, an idiot, a stupid person to fall for cultic beliefs or, fall into some kind of cult headspace, and how do you, and people say that to cult survivors, which is, I now see it as a real, almost offensive. I don't go, oh, that's offensive, but I do go, look, that's a really uninformed statement, right? And let me tell you why. But what's your response to that?
Well, I do think it's cruel to say that to people. And I think that people need to reflect on the fact that most all of us in life have been conned or duped at some point by somebody or by some organization. And anyone can be recruited into a cult, or anyone can be coercively controlled. There is no systematic evidence to suggest that there are particular vulnerability factors. There can be aspects of susceptibility, particularly transition points in life, or an openness to big ideas. A lack of cynicism can be a risk factor, but none of those are causal factors. And so actually, very intelligent people are recruited to cults. I don't actually really believe in intelligence as a concept, to be honest, but people who may be shown according to those measurements to have different levels of aptitude. It's been shown that anyone across that range of aptitude and skill can be recruited into cults. So people that are recruited are not stupid. They are conned by intelligent con people, con artists, by very manipulative, traumatizing narcissists who know exactly what they're doing, and who have a cadre of people who set out to recruit them. And I know this because I was one of those people. And so I didn't recruit stupid people to my group. I actually tried to recruit the smartest people I could find to my group. And you asked if I had regrets earlier, perhaps about my post-cult experience, but obviously the biggest regret I have about my cult experience was the fact that I recruited anybody, particularly to my first group.
Yeah.
I didn't really recruit anyone to the second group because we weren't too good at recruiting anybody. But the first group I did recruit some people to, and I really regret the fact that I did that. But it did sort of teach me a lifelong lesson about the fact that it's really wrong for people to judge. And it's really important for people to reflect, I think, on their own propensity to be conned and duped, as most people are. And to not recognize that, I think, is a dangerous form of hubris. And I think for people to ever think that they're immune to being recruited is a surefire way of probably ending up being recruited.
That's almost exactly what I have said. The way I sort of, my reductionist answer is, have you ever been lied to? Can you be lied to? You can be recruited into a cult then. It's that, because the frailty, you talk about those transition points or these sort of weak points. And really what I've kind of come to conclude is if you have an emotional spectrum of any kind and you have emotional needs, and every single human being does, unless you're kind of psychotic, then you're capable. It can happen,
Absolutely.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Okay, good. So
no, I totally agree. And I mean, I think human beings are unusually susceptible to that because of the way in which reality is perceived. And we see this with the whole kind of fake news, polarization of information, particularly on the internet, the ability to believe what might be palpably false is very easy, actually. And so, cults have just been a really neat way of doing that to people. And of course, the fact that cults have moved online to the extent that they have has only added to the acceleration in which people can be recruited to these extremist movements, which of course is a big area of concern, which I know you've addressed on your series over the years, and others too.
Yeah, big time. Well, cool. All right. Well, let's move on to this next one then, which is right in line with this, right? Which is knowing everything you know. And what would you say is your best advice for the general public who are not as educated on all of this in terms of what to watch out for like red flags? What are the red flags of coercive situations or cult recruitment or, that kind of thing that you might advise people to be aware of?
Well, I'm inclined to actually quote the following, which I appreciate you may have already featured before, so forgive me if you have, but it's a quote by Jeannie Mills, who wrote, "When you meet the friendliest people you've ever known who introduce you to the most loving group of people you've ever encountered, and you find the leader to be the most inspired, caring, and compassionate, understanding person you've ever met, and then you learn that the cause of the group is something you never dared hope could be accomplished. And all of this sounds too good to be true." Well, it is probably too good to be true.
Yeah.
Don't give up your education, your hopes and ambitions to follow a rainbow. And that quote from Jeannie Mills, and it was published, and we cited it in a chapter Linda and I wrote for the Encyclopedia of Mental Health. And for me, that's about idealism. And searching for that nirvana of hope. And for me, a healthy dose of cynicism is something of an antidote to that. We're all a lot more vaccine savvy, at least some of us are now, than we were 3 or 4 years ago. And I think cynicism, a healthy dose of it, can be a vaccine against the serious disease of cultism, but it's not a complete protection against catching the disease. And I think that if ever you feel that you're finding something as ideal as that, or if you see a loved one either extolling the virtues of a group or their partner in that way, then that's a clear red flag, along with the other telltale signs of loved ones being cut off from friends, family, change in their appearance, lifestyle choices, etc., are all the kind of red flags. But of course, as we know, it's really hard for people to spot that in themselves. It's easier usually for family members or friends to recognize that in others. But certainly, I always say, Other people describe it as critical thinking. That's another way of describing it. But being a little cynical, also trying to assemble reflectively a set of beliefs, so that you're not so open-minded that it's too easy for a cult to inculcate you with their ideology, I think are protective factors.
Yeah, big time. One of my favorite quotes from Demon Haunted World by Carl Sagan, which was basically my manual on critical thinking for many years and remains one of my favorite books I've ever read. It was life-changing for me. One of the humorous lines in there is, yeah, sure, approach life with an open mind, but don't be so open-minded your brain falls out. And yes, go Carl.
Absolutely. I often say it's good to have an open mind, but not an empty mind. So yeah, absolutely.
Yes, exactly. Another question of the chat that's a good one, Scientology related, and I'm not sure, where you're going to go with this or what you're going to say, but I know Steve Hassan has talked about how Scientology is, while its footprint in the world is tiny, it's minuscule in terms of its reach, its numbers. It yet is infamous for its multiple layers of coercive control. And this became more and more apparent to me the more I did the program and learned about all the different techniques and methods of how it works. And in stripping down, or what we call, peeling the onion, taking it apart, realizing how many years of that has gone on and how many layers there are to it, personally has certainly convinced me that I would agree with Dr. Hassan when he says the thing that makes Scientology kind of nefariously unique is the multiplicity of techniques and methods that are used that are leveled against a person in that group versus other groups where maybe one or two or three methods are sort of featured and really harped on. In Scientology, you could list out maybe 100. I mean, there are so many different things it's doing to you. What's your view on that and the recovery from Scientology specifically? In any experience with that or any comments on that?
Yeah, I agree that Scientology is a real breeding ground for a whole series of complex, coercive factors and relationships that people are inculcated into, and then to a certain extent, to one extent or another, then convey onto others or perpetrate onto others. And I say that guardedly because it's very important, I think, to put the blame where it surely should lie on the leadership of that organization. But of course, and the same I could say for the group I was a member of, I've already kind of fessed up to the fact that, I did things that I regret as a member of that group. But absolutely, in the case of Scientology, it's a very complex web that's weaved. And I think, the discourses that it creates, which are action-based ways of living. And you and I, talked a lot about this for your research for your master's, Chris, which was really great research. And I look forward to you being able to disseminate that more widely, because I think what it showed was that language is like a sort of spider's web of coercive relations. And that Scientology, and Hubbard in particular, was very, very good, excellent. I hesitate before saying unique because I think it would probably please him if I said that, but certainly excellent at creating that web, that nexus that binds people or double binds people into patterns of thinking. And I think it takes a long time and is an ongoing journey. I've worked with a number of people who are ex-Scientologists, and I think it takes a long time, probably forever in one's life cycle to get free of that. You can get ostensibly free from the bulk of it, but like I was saying, there are resonances, there are things in my mind that I have to check myself, on an almost daily or weekly basis. And Scientology is really good in that way of how it gets into people's heads and creates an alternative frame for looking at relationships and the world. And that's what's so insidious and harmful about it. It's also, incidentally, I think, why for some people, it appears to work. I've met people who go for their first auditing session and it appears to help them. And they say to me, well, actually, it was a good experience. What are you complaining about? Apart from the old aphorism that a stopped clock is right at least twice a day. I say at least twice a day. I'm not sure what the third time would be. I should have just said 2 times a day, twice a day. Nevertheless, a pseudotherapy group can occasionally help people almost by accident in that way. So I totally get that, and I've listened to current Scientology members talk about how the auditing has helped them, and I don't disbelieve them entirely. I'm sure on one level it has, but that doesn't mean that it's also not insidiously, destroying them too. And so it's coming to that painful realization, as all cult members do when they leave, that what might have appeared to be good actually was false, and that actually you were in a psychological prison from which you'll now have the opportunity to break free, and you have to kind of leave behind that experience. And that's why, a whole lot of people who leave cults are suffering from forms of PTSD or complex PTSD. And I don't say that to put a label on people. And I think it's most important to focus on the nature of that distress and what people are still living with post the group. And to use frameworks like the British Psychological Society's Power, Threat, Meaning framework.
Yes.
Explain how those power dynamics, oppressive power dynamics, how the threats to life and well-being that those created led to totally understandable threat responses, or i.e. forms of psychological distress, so that it's not about what's wrong with you, because what most of the cults are really good at doing, of course, is telling you that you're the problem.
That's right.
Whereas actually the Power, Threat, Meaning framework, and I want to pay tribute to Lucy Johnston and Mary Boyle and colleagues who created it, is a way of actually turning the tables on that kind of victim blaming approach to diagnosis, and actually say that most everyone that suffers from psychological distress has been harmed by somebody else or by something else, and we should point the finger in the direction where it's deserved, and help people be empowered through a better understanding of how they've been harmed, so that they can, like I said earlier on, help to deprogram themselves over time, but with the help, obviously, sometimes of professionals who can help them along the way.
Perfect. We're getting a lot of questions in the chat, and I'm just going to let the audience know that, this is a show where I'm going to also take some calls. So it's nothing, hopefully don't take it personally if I'm ignoring your questions. It's just, we've got a lot to cover, and I think we could probably legit be here for another hour and a half. And I don't know that Rod's committed to that. I'm certainly not. So we're going to move to our last prepared question for him and then take a couple calls. So my last question for you is, you have been an educator for a very long time. You've been doing this education game university thing for a long time. What would you say would be your, what are your accomplishments? What do you look back on with pride and go, yeah, as an educator, I'm really happy I did this, and particularly with this program or with this subject of cultic education?
I'm always immensely proud when students graduate and succeed, and particularly if they choose to use their learning to go on to do more work in this field, or if they haven't done work in the field before, that they go on to do that, because, one of our main intentions in creating the program was to hopefully create a new generation of people that could help survivors, that could do education and prevention work across the different domains of coercive control. So we find it really heartening to see a number of people going on to do that, to create their own businesses, or to do more work or new work in the coercive control field, whether it's working in the cult field, anti-cult field, or working with survivors of intimate partner violence or trafficking. And so really creating the program probably is my greatest accomplishment in education, because there were many people who said that it was kind of impossible to create a program that focused on these issues, that universities wouldn't want it, that it would be seen as too controversial. And so, I also pay tribute to the University of Salford for having faith in us, in having the program. And really, every time a student succeeds, we're just tremendously honored and proud of them. And so, that's what sustains us, I think, through the difficult times, because running any program has its challenges. It's not a walk in the park. We have a lot to deal with on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis, like all educators do. But that's really what sustains us through all of that, is seeing those successes. And particularly, in my career, where I've seen injustice, where I've seen people badly or poorly treated, whether that's in cults or in a relationship, or indeed sometimes even within education. If I can do something to help them rebound, to move forward and overcome that, then I feel I've done some good in my life. And really, I think for all of us to be able to say that you've done some good. So, I don't see this as job done, or that my career is, I try not to be one of these people that thinks that the best years are behind me. I hope that actually with Linda, with you, with others, that we can do more work to take this program to other places, to broaden the number of people that can be educated in these ways, and to really democratize that knowledge and skill, because we need just many more people who know about coercive control across its different domains, and who can effectively work to counter it, because really too many people's lives are ruined and harmed through it. And I think we have to turn the tables on it. And I suppose that's where I hope I haven't lost some of the idealism of my youth that led me into a workers' revolutionary party of sorts. I hope that in that sense we can revolutionize the world in terms of trying to create a society that doesn't perpetuate so much abuse and harm on so many of its citizens. And like many, I do not understand why, as a species, we allow that still to happen. And so in a small way, I hope that the program that we've created counters that. And I just want more and more people to create programs. So I've never sort of seen it as being, we want it to be our way or the highway. We want there to be many highways in which people can learn about these things and take forward work in this area.
Yeah, well, I'd say already from what I'm seeing on that, mission accomplished and well done. It's, in this divided world, as they say, right, where we've got, the misinformation campaigns and the propaganda and the nonsense, you do something like this. And I got to tell you, this program was life-changing for me. And you saw it. I mean, it was very, very difficult, and but getting through it was not just something good to do. It was life-changing, and I'm sure that I am not the only one of your graduates who feels that way. So I can't even begin to express my gratitude to you for having done it, and then helping drag me through it. So
thank you. Yeah. And thank you, Chris, for doing it with us. And I mean, it's amazing to bear witness to that, and also to be part of that in terms of the part that I play and that Linda play in that process for people. But we're just tremendously proud of you and others who've had that life-changing experience, and the fact that it's helped you do the good and important work that you're doing. And to the extent that we have helped a little along the way with that, then that just makes us feel tremendously good about you and about the work that we try to do.
Awesome. Well, thank you. So we have one call in the queue that's been waiting for a while, and this is David. So let's go ahead and pick this up, see if it comes through. I don't see any reason why it shouldn't. So I'm going to pick this one up. David, hi.
Hello.
Hey, you are on.
Hello. Good to hear from you again.
Yes, good to hear from you, David. Did you have something you would like to talk to Rod about?
Oh, definitely, yes. And it hopefully relates, at least tangentially, to my own PhD research in human rights. And it's to do with challenges to the idea of universal human rights. So I'm doing research essentially on universal human rights and very pro-universal human rights. And I'm wondering if you see any similarities between these kind of cult to control mechanisms and also the mechanisms of very authoritarian states that cast human rights as a Western imposition and a westernized phenomenon. Do you see any similarities there? Countries like Uganda, for instance, last week reintroduced the Kill the Gays bill, and a member of the governing party in Parliament specifically said that basically you're either with Uganda or you're with the West. I'm wondering if you see any similarities between that kind of rhetoric and that kind of action.
Okay.
David, there definitely is a synergy in my view. And it was Robert J. Lifton, of course, who originally, in writing about thought reform, did that based on looking at the way that at that time Maoist China was operating. So Lifton has always certainly seen it at a societal level, absolutely. And I think that what cults do and what totalitarian regimes do at the macro level is rather similar in the way that they dehumanize whole categories of people. So, I mean, obviously that was seen manifested most, clearly in the Holocaust, but in all the other genocides since. And unfortunately, that, dehumanization of the LGBTQI community, you're seeing it in Uganda, like you say, but you're seeing it also in places like Florida. You're seeing it in Russia. You're seeing it in other countries too. And it's part of, in my view, of that very oppressive notion that there are good people on the one hand and bad people on the other, that kind of very us, them, black and white thinking, which absolutely cuts against the notion of universal human rights. And that's why I think actually it's why organizations like the UN, for all its flaws, are still really important in terms of trying to create that level playing field around which then we can judge the extent to which states are guilty of perpetrating human rights abuses.
Cool.
Yes, I would agree with that in the UN. I'm cautiously optimistic about the UN in theory, and one of the things that keeps me optimistic, again in theory, not so much in practice unfortunately, is that every time there's been any kind of serious relativist challenge, it has been rejected and it has been defeated, whether that be general comments from certain human rights committees, whether that be the Vienna Conference in the 1990s and other such instances. Anytime there's been a universalism versus relativism clash at the highest level, it's been in favor of universalism. But then, unfortunately, the same UN is the UN that has Saudi Arabia telling Norway in a human rights review that they should maybe criminalize criticizing the Prophet Muhammad.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, David. Well, I've got a couple other calls in the queue. I know you've been waiting a long time for that, but I'm gonna cut it off on that one. Okay.
Oh yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for calling in, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, great to be back.
Yeah, I agree.
Bye-bye.
Good hearing from you. Bye-bye. All right, good. And we have Alex here. I think this is our apostate Alex, who has asked a couple of questions during the show here that were pretty good. Alex, you on?
Hey, yes, I'm here. Sorry it's all about multiple questions in the live stream. This is one of my favorite live streams you've ever done, so thank you. I've got two questions for Rod, if possible. The first one is, do you find that ex-Scientologists have more complex recovery needs when compared to other groups? Or does Scientology have an equally kind of long-lasting long-term effect or impact as other groups like the Moonies or other sort of cultic groups? Is there a difference you've seen with ex-Scientologists?
Not in a scientific sense, Alex, because I've not measured it, and I'm very much opposed to sort of superficial, subjective assessments. As a psychologist, as a scientist, I try not to do that. And in fact, one of the things that I think the field really needs are better measurement tools for measuring psychological effects of membership of cults and other abusive organizations or relationships. And here, I pay tribute to Carmen Almendros and her colleagues in Spain have done a lot of good work in developing new measurement instruments. And Linda and I, with others, have started to do that also. And I developed an extended group identity scale with Paul Martin and Ron Burks at Wellspring a number of years ago. And I say all of that because I think what we need is a better evidence base for that complexity. But having said all of that, upon presentation, I certainly agree that the presenting issues for survivors of Scientology are very complex. I spoke earlier about the very complex web of double binds that Scientology creates. Is that more complex and deeper rooted than in some groups? Yes, but are there other groups where it is as deep rooted? Probably also. And of course, I am reminded of what Michael Langoni, the now retired executive director of ICSA, famously said, which is that some cults hurt some people some of the time. And so not everyone's experience of a group is necessarily going to be the same. There may be common features a lot of the time, but some people get into it more deeply. Some people are perhaps more susceptible to some of that in terms of where they are when they encounter the group. Some people's recovery path is different for various different reasons. So as Herb Rosedale, the former AFF-ICSA president, said, I try to avoid superficial classification. I'm not saying you were saying that, Alex, but overall, I do agree that I think former Scientologists do have a lot of stuff to work out for sure. And is that worse than some groups? Yes, I agree, but there's no kind of league table of groups in terms of the complexity of the coercion. I think if we develop better measurement instruments, we'll be able to perhaps have more of a sort of scale to be able to say, well, this group is more dangerous than another group. But actually what I hope would happen with better measurement instruments is that we use that legally to say that when there are these human rights abuses, because, I'm reminded that this is a human rights issue from what David raised earlier, that these groups should be taken to task. Why is it that we allow groups to operate when they are clearly harming people generation after generation? Why don't we use existing laws, or why don't we create new laws to actually take these groups out and to stop them from perpetrating those harms? And so we actually need the measurement instruments for that too. I realize I've gone way beyond your question, Alex, but that's my one sometimes. But you raise a really good point that I think has lots of ramifications.
All right, Alex, fire one more question. One more question.
Yeah, go on. Yeah, it's just a short one. It might not be short, the answer, but I'll try and be quick. I've come across people, and I don't know if you have as well, but people who have perhaps left and they've kind of gone through their recovery process and it's not affecting them anymore. They're kind of over it, for lack of better terms. But they might still have some sort of, vengeance or anger still there about the group that maybe they were a part of previously. How would you approach a situation like that with someone who's kind of not upset and they've kind of dealt with the emotional side of it and they've kind of processed the recovery and the leaving of it, but there's still like that inner anger? Is that a sign that there's more work to do, or is that healthy to have a bit of sort of anger still there or upset almost?
The question of to what extent is anger healthy or unhealthy is a really interesting one in the psychological community, and there are psychologists that would argue that anger is an unhealthy emotion. However, I think feeling anger towards those that have committed harm is actually fairly healthy if it allows you to continue to see clearly who the perpetrators are, to put it in the vernacular, who the bad guys are as opposed to the good guys, or the bad people compared to the good people. And I think one of the difficulties sometimes of relativist thinking in the modern era, or maybe the postmodern era, depending on how we want to categorize it, is that it's kind of everything's up for grabs, that, maybe certain things weren't so bad after all. But actually, I think that abusers are abusers and should be condemned for that. And okay, if somebody's reformable, they should be allowed to reform themselves, but the abuse is still the abuse. And so, am I angry when I see people being abused? Sure, I am. And I think that if that anger can be channeled in a positive direction, to try and take legal action against the groups, to try and prevent people from being recruited, to try and help people recover, to try and create education and training programs, then I think that's a good channel for that anger. So I think a bit of healthy anger can actually be a good grist to the mill. It's a good dialectic to change, would be my overall answer to that.
Perfect. All right, Alex.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on, Chris.
Absolutely. Thanks for calling in, man. You gave some great questions tonight. You really helped the show. Talk to you soon.
Thank you. Cheers.
Bye-bye. All right, good. We have one more call we're going to pull in here, and then we're going to wrap it up on the calls. And this is Dr. or Colonel Brock, I think, picking this one up here. And there we go. Hello, you are on.
Hi, Chris. How are you? Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Well, right back at you. Hope you're wearing the green. Have a good night tonight.
Oh, yeah. I don't want to get pinched too early.
Excellent. So what's your question for Rod?
I also hope Mel is going to feel better soon.
Yes, she will. She's going to recover over the weekend, I think.
But, Dr. Rod, my question, the first one really is, do you see any similarities or differences between military boot camp training and, say, the brutal indoctrination in cults? How do soldiers have after effects just as much as cult members?
Absolutely. The way that people in the military are trained has a lot in common. And in fact, Margaret Singer wrote about this quite a bit back in the day, some of the similarities to the effects of military training compared to cults. Absolutely. That doesn't mean I'm saying the military equals a cult. I think that there is the propensity to coercive cultic aspects to the way that people are trained. And of course, the military ideology can be seen to justify that based on the kind of command structure, etc. But you're right. I think the psychological effects a lot of the time can be similar. But, I think the military has been on a learning journey to a certain extent. And I think it's important. And I know that people differ on these views. But I think that organizations can reform if they're open to it. And I think some of the military's been on a journey where I think they recognize that actually to have a military that is able to deal with the sophistication of the threats facing a country, particularly like around cyber attacks and so on, modern espionage, if you will, that actually what you need is a military that is able to think for itself. And so I think that actually, to a certain extent, the military's moved on, but I'm not trying to say that there isn't still harm taking place within it. I'm not somebody who has studied that in detail, so I'm probably going to hesitate before making more generalized statements, but I am aware that, senior military have given a lot of thought to these questions, and that probably things are moving, hopefully, in a more positive direction. But the overall comparison you make, I think, is a valid one in my view.
Great. Okay.
One other point was just to follow on to Alex, he had mentioned how much anger we may still hold inside, and when does it peak out? And I just wanted to say that I had forgotten about the church for decades until SPTV started showing up in YouTube. And it really just triggered all these, I don't know, animosities, just memories, just bad feelings, bad memories. And I wanted to know what both of you think about the SPTV, quote unquote, phenomenon, and how that may be affecting former members of Scientology.
I guess I'm a little confused by what you mean by the SPTV phenomenon. You mean what you just described in terms of the effect that watching like Aaron and Mark and Mike and what they're doing on you?
Yeah, they're fairly new on the scene, I suppose. They've been around for a few years.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, for me, my take is that it's a good thing to get exposure out there. I think, yeah, right. Sounds like there's a dog or something in the background.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries. I think it's a good thing that there's more exposure. I think it's a good thing, and I've been encouraging of other people to, start channels. Alex started a channel. Other people are starting, YouTube channels or work on this topic around Scientology or around destructive cults. I think this is a good thing to get that more broadly known because, for example, that's how you heard about it. Then you end up here. Then you end up, listening to Rod and me, and we're talking about recovery and education, which are things they don't tend to get into on those channels. And we're all part of the same kind of world of trying to expose abuses, let the world know this stuff exists, and give a path to how to kind of come back from that. I think as a whole, that's what we are all trying to accomplish, and we're all doing it in our own different ways, and so that's my immediate take. What do you think about that answer?
Oh, I agree, and I'm a big fan of all of you. And one last question for Dr. Rod. Have you heard of Dr. Stephen Simonton at UC Davis and his work on genius and insanity?
I actually haven't, but until you've mentioned it now, so that's something I'm surely going to look into. I just wanted to quickly comment on your other question, and I agreed with Chris's answer, but just to add that I think that we need more support groups, I think, for former members, because I think when you encounter that kind of information, like you say, if you've not been thinking about the group for a while, I think the ability then to be able to kind of process that with other people that have had the experience, I think is really important. And so that would be my answer to that, in a way that we need to help each other across the field by creating those places for people to go to then talk through what it means for them to see that material. But I really like not only this podcast but other opportunities to dialogue with people, because you've just raised the name of an academician that I wasn't aware of, and I'm always really keen to learn more about this. So thank you for mentioning that.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you very much for calling in. Yeah.
Thanks.
All right. Bye-bye. All right. Well, we are wrapping up. Rod, I want to thank you again for being a guest on my show here tonight and sharing your wisdom. It has been, as always, a pleasure speaking with you, and to get the opportunity to have you speak to my audience, an honor. It really, really, I'm very thankful that you were willing to do this. So thank you.
Well, my great pleasure, Chris, and thank you so much for inviting me on. Like I said earlier, it's been a real blast. I've really enjoyed it. And let's do it again, because I think a number of people said, there's other things they'd like to talk to us about. And so I've so enjoyed this. So if you'll have me again, if we could do this again, I would really love to do that. Absolutely. That will not be a problem. All right. Good. But I'm going to turn you off right now, and we're going to wrap up. So bye, everybody. Bye, Rod. All right. And on that happy note, I want to thank all of you for being part of the show here tonight. And of course, if you're catching this on replay, just as well.
And yes, there will be more guests coming on the show here, and we will be doing more of this. Clearly, except for that little technical hitch at the beginning, we actually had a pretty good show here tonight. And yes, I will definitely tell Melissa she was missed. I tell her that every time she's not here because you guys are awesome in acknowledging her and her presence here. And that is everything I've wanted in including her in as a co-host here. So on that happy note, I will let you guys know I cannot pass up my critical thinking cards. We've got to do this as a staple of the show. And we are going to talk tonight about the halo effect. This is a cognitive bias from my critical thinking cards. The halo effect, how much you like someone or how attractive they are, influences your other judgments of them. Really? If you notice that you're giving consistently high or low marks across the board, it's worth considering that your judgment may be suffering from the halo effect. All right, keep that in mind this week, guys. And the podcast tomorrow is, I think you guys are going to enjoy it. Some of you will, at least. It's about critical thinking and teaching critical thinking. I have a wonderful guest on who you guys will see tomorrow when the podcast drops. And we'll be doing a usual pre-recorded Q&A show on Sunday. All right. Woo, what a show. And on that happy note, bye-bye.